Okay, let's jump in. We're looking at something that's gotten a ton of buzz lately. Semaglutide for weight loss.
Right. But we're not just scratching the surface today, are we?
No, definitely not. Forget the usual headlines. We're doing a real deep dive here, focusing on a pretty specific and, frankly, different take.
Yeah, we've got these excerpts from Dan Hollis's Semaglutide Manifesto and another piece that reflects on his ideas about, well, failure.
Exactly. So our mission today is really to unpack what makes his approach stand out. Pull out those key insights, the kind of surprising angles you probably won't hear in your average chat about this medication.
And you should definitely stick around because honestly, this perspective frames it as much more than just a drug. It's about a deeper human process.
Totally. And you'll hear how rethinking something as basic as failure might just be, the most effective tool you have.
So where do we start? That core idea from the manifesto seems like the place.
Yeah, Hollis puts it right out there. Bold statement. This is not a drug journey. It's a human one.
That really shifts the perspective immediately, doesn't it? It sets up semaglutide not as the magic bullet, but as a tool.
A powerful one, he says. Yes, but powerful because of how it works. The sources say it actually alters how the brain is thinking about basic stuff. Hunger, feeling full, even reward.
Right. And because it has that impact on the brain, which is, complex,
Super complex.
the sources really hammer home that it needs support, education, and real human guidance. It's not just, here's your shot, good luck.
No. So what that means for you listening is, if you were thinking this was purely physical stomach, metabolism.
Yeah.
These sources argue pretty strongly that there's this huge psychological, emotional, behavioral layer that you just can't ignore.
It's got to be addressed. It's a whole person thing, not just a prescription you follow by yourself.
Which, makes sense. Eating is complicated. And that leads right into another big idea. Hollis pushes back on hard. Willpower.
Ah, yes. The manifesto says it flat out. Willpower was never the problem.
Okay, but hold on. Willpower was never the problem. That goes against decades of diet culture advice. How does he back that up in the sources?
Well, his reasoning, according to the text, is that trying to rely only on willpower long term is sort of doomed. You're fighting against really powerful biological signals, emotions, these ingrained habit loops.
It's like trying to swim upstream constantly.
Exactly. It's exhausting and often ineffective against those deeper forces. So if that's not the answer, what is?
The sources lay it out. Insight, structure, tools that meet your biology where it's at.
See, that changes the whole game. It stops framing weight struggles as some kind of moral failure. You weren't disciplined enough, didn't try hard enough.
Right, moves away from blame.
And towards seeing it as a practical issue needing a smarter strategy. Understand your own biology, your patterns. The message is actually really hopeful. There is no shame here, only process.
Yeah, you're not broken. You're just working against biological, maybe even cultural stuff that nobody ever really explained properly.
And speaking of those deeper things, that brings up the next big point from the manifesto. Emotional weight.
It says, this is emotional weight as much as it is physical weight.
That feels very true. The sources point out that, people eat for reasons way beyond physical hunger. Things like anxiety, loneliness, boredom.
Feeling overwhelmed, maybe undersupported.
All of that. Now, semaglutide can dial down the physical hunger, which is huge, but the sources are clear. Without support for the rest of it, meaning all that emotional stuff, most people relapse.
Because the drug quiets the physical cue, but it doesn't magically teach you a new way to handle feeling bored or anxious, right?
Precisely. So Hollis's system, as it's described, is meant to guide that emotional recalibration, as he calls it, helping you figure out what to do when food isn't your go-to coping mechanism anymore.
Okay, that makes sense. It's addressing the underlying why.
Let's talk about this next morning from the manifesto because it's counterintuitive for a lot of people. Fast weight loss without metabolic pacing is a trap.
Yeah, that definitely makes you stop and think.
Right.
We're always hearing about wanting results fast, get the weight off quickly.
But the source argues that while the numbers on the scale might drop fast if it happens too fast, without paying attention to your metabolism, well, there are real downsides.
Like what? What are the risks mentioned?
Your metabolism can actually slow down significantly. You can lose valuable muscle mass, not just fat. And that makes it much harder to keep the weight off later on.
Okay, so it undermines the long-term goal.
Right, so instead of just speed, the focus here is on pacing, carefully timing nutrition, building habits sustainably, managing progress in a way that works with your body's metabolism, not against it.
Got it. Which brings us to something really, really critical. It shows up in both sources we looked at. The manifesto even uses bold italics. The real work begins after the medication.
Yes. And that second source drives it home too, saying most people aren't failing semaglutide, they're failing to prepare for what comes after it.
Wow. That's a huge claim. What does that mean practically?
It means that when the medication stops, if you haven't built a solid foundation, those old patterns, the appetite signals, the emotional triggers we just talked about, they can come flooding back.
And if you haven't used the time on the drug to build new skills, new ways of eating, thinking, coping.
You're really vulnerable. You might end up back where you started, maybe even with a metabolism that's less efficient than before. It's a tough spot.
So that's why Hollis argues that the conversation about the after phase has to start right at the beginning, day one.
Exactly. It's about consciously building habits that can live beyond the injections. The medication creates this window, right? Less food noise, maybe it feels easier to change
A
behaviors.
window of opportunity.
Yes. But the lasting success depends entirely on what you build inside that window.
This whole approach naturally leads into another really powerful idea, this one really highlighted in the second source. Completely reframing failure.
Oh, this part is fascinating. It feels like it goes way beyond just weight loss. Hollis takes this concept that's usually so heavy with shame,
Yeah, failure feels awful.
and he just flips it. There's this quote really stuck with me. Failure isn't the end. It's a message, a moment of feedback.
A message.
And sometimes, he says, it's the most honest conversation you'll ever have with yourself.
Wow. Okay, so instead of it being this verdict on you as a person, it's data.
Purely a data point, something you observe, you analyze, you learn from, objectively, without the shame story attached.
But that sounds hard. I mean, how do you actually do that? Go from feeling that pit in your stomach, the disappointment, the shame, to just seeing data?
Well, that's where having a framework helps. Connecting it back to the semaglutide journey, he might suggest that, say, regaining some weight isn't you failing or betraying your goals. It might just be your brain and body looking for that old familiar rhythm.
The path of least resistance, maybe?
Kind of, and trying to just ignore that or beat yourself up about it, that can actually cause a fracture, he says. It stops your progress.
So if you stumble, if things aren't going perfectly, it's not proof that you're the problem.
Exactly. It's seen as a sign that your support system, maybe your habits, your emotional tools, the guidance you have, that system needs reinforcing. It's diagnostic, not damning.
That's a much kinder way to look at it.
It really is. He has these lines that just give you permission to be human. Like, setbacks are sacred if you're willing to look at them with curiosity instead of judgment.
Curiosity instead of judgment, that's powerful.
Well, and this one, too. The shame isn't in failing. The shame is in pretending you were supposed to be perfect.
Oof, yeah. That hits home. So much pressure to be perfect.
Totally. And this idea of grace comes in. Grace isn't about never messing up. It's about what you do when you mess up. Do you reach for self-blame or do you reach for a better tool?
A better tool, based on what the failure data told you.
Precisely. And a key tool he offers is actually a question. When you stumble, ask yourself, what story am I telling myself about this failure? And is that story helping me become who I want to be?
That question forces you to step back, doesn't it? To examine the narrative instead of just reacting emotionally.
It makes you an active participant in shaping the meaning of the setback, not just a victim of it. It's all about learning to, as he puts it, fail forward.
Fail forward. I like that. And when you think about it that way, how could looking at your own past, stumbles, maybe weight-related, maybe something else entirely differently, what data might be there if you could just strip away the shame?
It's a really useful lens, and tying it back to Hollis's overall approach in the manifesto, it circles back to connection.
Right. It emphasizes this is a conversation, not a prescription.
Yeah, it's about relationship, your relationship with food, with your body, but also crucially to the people guiding you.
So Hollis, through his system, aims to provide that context, a map, a guide, and a community that gets it, people who understand the unique challenges.
It reinforces that whole idea you're not just getting a drug, you're entering a supported process, which leads to that final thought from the manifesto.
The one about you're not starting over,
Yeah.
you're starting right.
Exactly, because the idea is you're starting this time not from a place of shame or feeling broken, but with tools designed to work with your biology and brain.
And with support that understands the journey, focusing on alignment, not shame.
Right. So let's kind of wrap up the key takeaways from this deep dive into Dan Hollis's perspective based on these sources.
Okay. It's clear his approach frames this whole thing as a fundamentally human journey, not just a medical one.
Definitely. It heavily factors in the emotional and behavioral side of things, stresses why pacing metabolic pacing is so important, not just speed.
And highlights that critical after phase. Preparation for life beyond the medication is paramount.
And maybe the most profound piece is that radical reframing of failure, taking it from shame to data, feedback, a chance to learn and strengthen your approach.
Yeah, it's presented as this whole system, really, built on support, conversation, and aligning these powerful tools with how we actually function as humans.
So the final thought to leave you with, pondering Hollis's perspective.
What if you really could remove the shame? If failure truly was just data, what could you learn from your own past stumbles in any area that maybe you haven't let yourself see before?
And following from that, what better tool, built from that clear-eyed insight, might be waiting for you to reach for the next time things don't go perfectly?